Alrighty, so this is the last but definitely the best session of the day, just so you're all prepared. And it follows on actually perfectly from the session that we just had. So let me start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land and pay my respects to the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and introduce myself. So I'm Nicole Bieske. I'm the Director of Research and Policy at the Brotherhood of St Lawrence. And I am joined up here by some excellent panellists who I'll introduce just in a minute. But as we all know, we've been talking about the tax system, we've been talking about the drivers and opportunities for change. We've just heard some pretty compelling stories as to why the system needs to change and what the impact of having the current system is. And we're going to hear more of that really directly from people who've had really direct lived experience of the challenges created by the current system. When Miranda spoke earlier today, she talked to us about the importance of really explaining the value of investing in government and investing in services. So we talk here about tax and we talk about transfers, but there is also this component about investment in government services that is key for taxation discussions. And we know that tax in Australia is often seen generally as a burden. It's something that we've created this culture around people really being resistant to and having concerns about taxation and the taxation amounts that they pay, despite the charts that we've seen about our taxation rates in this country. And we have not done a very good job at really talking about the value of government and the value of government service provision. In fact, the necessity of government service provision and the way in which we all benefit from that. So we have the opportunity to hear really directly from my colleagues who've joined us up here about what that experience is for them in the current system, and also based on their expertise, what recommendations for change they have based directly on what they've experienced. The conversation that was just had a bit about poverty, from our perspective, from a BSL perspective, and certainly I think from what we've seen and heard in the room, poverty is monetary, but it's also multidimensional. It isn't solely monetary. It actually also impacts in relation to the various dimensions of life. To come back to Amartya Sen, which is where we actually began the day, thinking about capabilities and ensuring that people are able to live the lives to which they aspire and they deserve, and ensuring that we create the environment in which people are able to do that. So that requires education, healthcare, NDIS, all of the issues that we've heard about in the previous session and throughout the day. So, in terms of my fellow panellists up here, so let me just briefly introduce them. So Nathan, down the end, is someone very well known to BSL. He came to BSL first as a participant in the Transition to Work program and has since taken up a role serving as youth advisor. So he works with BSL and he works with the National Youth Employment Body. He was a panellist at the 2022 Jobs and Skills Summit and since then has really continued his work discussing and advising on issues that impact young people around Australia and has represented those voices in a whole range of forums, including as co-host at last year's Sample Oration, most recently attending the swearing-in of Australia's new Governor-General, and Nathan studying a Cert 4, I think, in youth work. Juanita, who I believe is known to many of you in the room, is a researcher and advocate in areas of income support, child support and housing. She's worked in the not-for-profit sector for over 30 years. And as she says, started rattling cages after becoming a single mother of 3 and experiencing the sudden barriers that brought to her and her children. She has a Master of International Community Development, a Bachelor of Arts and Commerce, and has worked on a variety of campaigns and projects, including parenting payment single, child support, raise the rate, and housing security. And last but not least, Peter, right next to me. So Peter worked in the Commonwealth Bank for over 20 years and had various roles there. In 2006, as a pedestrian, Peter was involved in a motor vehicle accident and as a result of that has a number of ongoing conditions. so was unable to return to a banking career, then worked for 15 years at Myers, but was terminated from that position in 2018 and was on job seeker and later on the disability support pension. Peter has also appeared before several parliamentary inquiries, participated in ministerial roundtables as part of the Job Summit, and is an advocate for raising the rate. So this is the incredible experience that I have up with me here on the panel. And I'm going to start with some specific questions, just drawing out those different components of the services and the challenges, in fact, that have been experienced. So I might start, Nathan, down the end with you. So as we know, part of your story, just a part of your story, has been about moving into the workforce. And so it'd be interesting just to hear about how government services helped or not in your process of doing that.
Yeah, so I think all in all, my experience of government services has been a bit of a mixed bag. You know, as an early school leaver, I was a bit like, what's going to happen to me now? I didn't really know how am I going to find work, where to find work, you know, how to apply for a job and this sort of thing. So initially coming to, you know, Centrelink and transition to work, being what felt like, you know, tossed around between different service providers. It was a bit of like whiplash, like what's going on here? And then being pushed into study and employment that, you know, wasn't really, it didn't interest me. It wasn't anything that I thought that I would do. But yeah, so that sort of thing. And then when I did eventually find a service provider that was helping me, like for me and not for whatever interest that the service provider may have, I did eventually find work. And then so started working more, and then over time, you know, payments were from Centrelink were reduced, and then I found, man, I really can't afford all the stuff that I need and that I'd like to do. So ended up last year picking up a second job, which then was taxed to high heaven, it felt like, you know. So it ended up being, you know, in terms of the finance of it, just is like status quo. I didn't really shift, so I was still struggling. So yeah, so that's been a bit of a struggle. Now though, I'm enjoying the benefits of free TAFE. So like I said, a mixed bag.
Thanks, Nathan. Juanita, as we've already heard and as many people are aware, you have experience and lived experience across so many different areas: income support, child support, housing. In terms of the government systems that we're all talking about and thinking about, what stands out for you as examples of good systems and services, and what are the ones that need real reform?
Thanks. The only thing that stands out as being good is that these things are available to us, but that's where it stops for me, knowing that I could access income support, whether that's through parenting parent single or what's it called this week? Job seeker allowance, child support. Knowing that those are available allowed me to make some choices earlier on in the game. I've been a single mum of 3 for 13 years. I just want to say at the end of the day, thanks everyone for still being awake. And I want to apologise to Tim Helm and Raina Fahey from Prosper, who tried their absolute darndest to help me wrap my head around an economic thing that I could bring to this economic tax forum, and I didn't get it, and I'm so sorry. But they have some really spectacular ideas, so hit them up. Yeah. What I'd like to do instead is still give you some numbers from 2 particular things that I think will resonate, particularly following on what Ali said. I disagree, Ali, with the money bit, but that's okay, because that's what we're all here to have a discussion. I'd like to just read to you a journal entry that I found from 2 years ago when I was on Job Seeker, and I had a son who's 18, 16 and 12, 13, to demonstrate how grossly inadequate income supports are. And I don't care how many subsidies there are or how many rebates, they never cut it. They do not cut it. It does not matter that you pay $190 to go to a therapist for your son because you've got some sort of mental health plan. You have to pay that $190 up front and then you get the money back. Where do you get that money from? So I want to just list out, these are things that where I'm just over it. I'm so sick of people telling me that, oh, but you have to think of politics where politics is at. It's just not acceptable anymore. It's just not. It's a moral issue. I don't care how many times you want to come and say, oh, but we have to give the politicians what they need to hear to convince them. It just doesn't cut it anymore for me, okay? So, and I'll meet anyone outside and have a chat. 13 years into this game and I have a master's and I have 3 exceptional children. I should not be a 51-year-old woman who has $50,000 in my superannuation and be struggling to, I literally cannot afford to pay rent anywhere in this country right now. Okay, so this is a journal entry from the 15th of July on 2023. Things that need repairing or replacing in my house. 1, Astor needs a bed. He's currently sleeping on the sofa. 2, Ingmar needs a bed base. He's currently sleeping on a mattress on a sofa. 3, my phone, I've dropped it too many times. I can't see time or who's calling because where blank patches are. There are various other issues with its general capabilities. 4, what's the noise with the fridge? Do I need a bigger one or a new one? 5, my laptop. I'm still borrowing Bruce's old one. It gets so hot you could fry an egg. 6, stove on the stovetop glass. I dropped the pestle and mortar on it. The corner is missing, all the liquid goes in, then the stove won't work until it's dry. 7, the internet. Why the fuck doesn't it work properly since Luke added another network? TV, why can't the remote pick up Netflix or all the SBS, ABC, iView on demand channels? Why do I keep watching Friends and Big Bang Theory for company? 9, the Windows keys, they're all locked shut. 10, I wouldn't mind a car. 11, T-Ball's door handle. We were currently opening, at that time, we were opening my son's bedroom door with a pair of scissors. So how does a finite amount, such as, what's it called again? Job Seeker. How does that finite amount of money ever reach those kinds of expenses? And these are not made up expenses of me going, oh, I'd love this. I need a laptop to engage in the community. My children need to sleep in a bed and not on the floor. My 15-year-old's 6'1", they need these things. So I don't care how many subsidies there are, I don't care how many, whatever, $100 of income support goes to my rent. My rent was $520 a week. It just doesn't cut it, and we can do better. So I'm gonna go to my final bit about, and this is where Tim and Raina tried to help me, and I'm going to try and explain it in my own words. I've just moved out of an apartment after 7.5 years. In that time, I paid $180,000 in rent. Now, the owner of that apartment, who owns several apartments, she bought it in 2013 for $240,000. It is now, a 3-bedroom apartment in Yarraville is now valued at $940,000. Now, I'm not an economist, thank God, but if you look at the difference with what I've paid, and I know she'll have interest and yada yada, she paid $240,000. I paid $180,000. The difference is $60,000, and she is now sitting on a property valued at $940,000. To my mind, the whole housing racket and the whole investment sector is where you need to be taxed, because I can't think of any other form of investment where you are relying on one person or one household to sit on your nest egg and you don't even know who they are. And that's where, if I can say anything about tax that might sound remotely like I know what I'm talking about, that big chunk of money that she's got access to now for doing absolutely bugger all is where we can get more money for people who really need it.
Thanks, Juanita. And you can see up on the screen some reflections of the panel's lived experience, but from this discussion. And I just want to call out two of them. One is this should have been the opening panel. So I don't think people are concerned about you being or not being an economist. People are really compelled by what they're hearing. And the other thing, just to pick up on the discussion about monetary or not, it's not either or, right? You can raise the rate, increase the payments, and also improve universal services. So it's not an either or proposition. And yeah, and certainly, you know, from our perspective, it's monetary and it's multidimensional. It's all of the components together need to be increased and improved. So over to Peter. So job seeker, we've heard quite a bit about today. The disability support pension, we've heard a bit about, and Ali was talking a bit about that too, are important pieces of our social security system. From your experience, this is I know the answer to this question. Do they need to be improved? And if so, how?
Okay, yeah. Can you hear me? Oh, good. That's a difficult question to answer because constantly we're told the safety net should be sustainable, but the safety net's full of bloody big holes. The second thing I'll address just quickly, because I've had a lot of speakers, I've taken a little bit from everyone today. Services Australia and the Department of Human Services, they're misnamed definitely because they don't offer service to their clients. You're treated as a number, you're not treated as an individual. And the whole process is mind-numbing. How do we improve the situation? Well, a good start would be to increase all income support payments, youth allowance, job seeker in particular, and there's good economic reasons to do so. I think most of the heavy-hitting economists have gone this afternoon, but this is my spin. Someone on youth allowance or job seeker getting extra money will go to the local hairdresser. They'll have a haircut. They are putting money into small business, giving a tax cut or a concession to a millionaire. With the extra money, they'll buy a Mercedes or a BMW, benefiting the shareholders in Berlin or Tokyo. So they'll spend on different items. So there are good reasons economically to raise the payments. I was looking at a number of things today. So one of the things that was mentioned this morning was suicide. Poverty creates isolation. It does create shame. I was involved in a car accident in 2006. I've had back problems ever since, neck problems. I had to give up work, found a job at Myer, as it turned out, where I could be on my feet. I got postural change, so that helped me with work. As I aged and my conditions worsened, I lost my job and I was terminated. I went on to job seeker, which is a pittance. I felt shame, I felt isolation. Much of our culture, we go out, we have a drink, we have a meal. If you go to a friend for dinner, you'll take a bottle of wine or you'll have a beer. When you're on job seeker, you are struggling to even pay for a meal or medication or pay your rent. It's hard choices. It's almost impossible to live on these amounts of money. So Raising these rates is an imperative, but it's the social isolation. During the period I was on Job Seeker, my mother died. As families do, you come together, people will buy chickens or they'll buy food or you'll buy pizza. I had $5 in my pocket. Even though I was not to blame, I felt shame at that. I felt embarrassed, I was humiliated. So these are the real personal effects on living on Job Seeker. I got medical opinions, so I applied for the disability support pension. I was denied. And I looked up the figure today, just for this afternoon. 70% of people are denied the disability support pension. It's a staggering statistic. At the time when I applied, I was given 3 reasons. 1, my condition hadn't stabilised. 2, it hadn't been properly diagnosed, and I can't quite recall the third one now. But so I uploaded hundreds and hundreds of pages of medical reports, CT reports, MRIs, ultrasounds, etc. I ended up getting the disability support pension. It's almost impossible to live on that, but I acknowledge it's about $400 a fortnight more than Job Seeker. That is absolutely impossible. How do we improve the situation? Rental assistance. The Albanese government increased rental assistance by 10%, and they boasted about that, but that was 10% on a very, very low base. I looked at the figures again today. The maximum rent assistance is $211.20 per fortnight, not per week, per fortnight. And to get that, you have to pay a rent of $430 per fortnight. If you're receiving $770 Job Seeker, you have to pay another $200 on top of the rent assistance from that paltry payment to meet your rent commitments. So choices are made, people are getting sick, people are getting depressed. How do we lift it? Well, we need to link, it's been discussed before, we need to link rent assistance to the real price of rent. That needs to be a priority. We need to increase all income support payments. That needs to be priority. I agree in part with you, Ali. It's not just about money. You need to also put programs in place, create training, reskilling, real jobs, real retraining, and look at the future economy, not jobs that we have now.
Thanks, Peter. I think just looking at some of the reflections again, there's an interesting question in here about what do you think it is that stops politicians and even economists, and I don't want the economists in the room to feel that they're under attack by any stretch of the imagination, but what is it that stops politicians and even economists seeing that prevention A, saves lives, and B, invests in the future? Juanita.
They have wives at home enabling their careers.
They're not all male politicians, just or in same-sex relationships. So
they're able to pay other people to enable their careers.
I'll have a go at that question. Part of the reason we struggle is it's a lack of political will, and it comes down to vested interests. We heard this morning again people talking about the lobbyists. The business community, many of our richest people, Gina Reinhardt is well known for going on the record saying, we pay too much tax, people should be paid less, we should cut benefits. It's myopic thinking. Those people are hurting themselves in the long term because you need customers to sell your products. End of the day, if everyone has a higher income, everyone has a higher quality of life, they can actually, excuse me, there are actual benefits which will go to the business community and create a much better society at the same time.
So in terms of, and we've already heard quite a bit of it from all of you in terms of your thoughts about how the system needs to change and advice, and we've talked quite a bit about job seeker obviously needing to increase and even the DSP amounts being insufficient And we heard earlier today about the aged pension amounts also being insufficient. But are there other recommendations that any of you would want to make to ministers, to politicians, to bureaucrats about how the system themselves need to change, need to be reformed?
I can speak to the child support system, which we haven't touched on yet, or it has been touched on by Therese and Jenny. I think one thing I would recommend is delinking the family tax benefit from child support. Recently, I cancelled my child support after 13 years because it had got to the astronomically high amount of $65 a fortnight. And I got sick of seeing my ex-husband's name come through my mailbox, a man who doesn't speak to me, a man who has followed all of the things that you have more children to reduce the amount of child support you pay. You don't work as much to reduce it, like everything on the website has been done. So I cancelled it. And in doing so, because it's linked to family tax benefit, it reduced my family tax benefit by 80%. So that went from about $800 a fortnight down to $187 a fortnight. And when I asked why, they said, if you don't need his money, you don't need ours. And I said, I need the money. But if you want to take family violence and protection of women seriously in this country, you'll enable women to have autonomy with their money, and you'll continue to support them to separate from their partners. My ex-husband has never raised his hand to me. I am not in that, there are things that he did that are deeply unpleasant, but that's not the category I'm in. But for me, who is resourceful, who has a great social network, all the rest of it, to lose that amount of money simply because I said I don't want to see that man's name come through my inbox every 2 weeks and pick off that scab and keep me in that space, I was punished for it. My son has always also been punished, who's neurodivergent. Because I cancelled the child support, he now does not have access to subsidies for his ADHD meds. So it went from $6 a month up to $30 a month. So that is one of my, please delink those two. They should not have anything to do with one another.
And maybe, Nathan, from the work that you've done, your experience with transition to work and the employment services system and the work that you've done as a youth advisor and the National Youth Employment Body, what have you seen that's more effective, perhaps, in the work that you're doing than the way that the system itself has operated? Speak,
specifically to my experience. I mean, I would love to see, like we've been talking about earlier, to see people's stories and lives, embedded in decision making, politicians and ministers and this sort of thing, to bring it to them to within if there's like developing new services or changes to existing services, having people with experience of the service system co-developing, as it were. I think in addition to raising the rate of job seeker and Austudy and things like that, I would love to see, in terms of mutual obligations as well, a shift away from, punitive sort of measures to more like to incentivizing people to be genuine participants rather than punishing them for what, may be like an indirect. They're not trying to, scam anybody, but yeah, that's me.
Something else that should be done too is better functionality and interoperability, that sounds technical, doesn't it, between the departments. Now, when somebody is applying for NDIS, then chances are they could be eligible for the disability support pension, or vice versa. So rather than lodge an application for the DSP or lodge an application for the NDIS, two separate applications, surely government can communicate with each other And, oh yeah, it's a big dream, isn't it? Governments could, one department talks to another and look at the two applications in tandem. So look at the NDIS in conjunction with the DSP. So that's one thing. The second thing is put people back into Centrelink. We have seen over a long period of time, and government are pushing MyGov and digital transformation, taking people out of the system, led to the disgusting robo-debt situation. And CAS and ACOS have done great work referring to the Ombudsman about the compliance issues and the employment services. So you need to put people back into Centrelink, personalise things. Everyone is an individual, not a number. And that we touched on this morning too, the 36,000 public servants, how that made a huge difference, cleared the 41,000 Veterans Affairs cases and reduced Services Australia waiting time. So basically put people back at the centre of Centrelink.
So let me wind it up just by really thanking all of you for sharing your experiences, but also your expertise in terms of the challenges that the system has built within it, and actually the opportunities for reform and the experiences that you've all had in doing that and implementing that. And there's a range of different comments coming through based on the discussion that we've just been having, all really focused on reflecting parts of the conversation back to you. So the importance of all of the reforms that you've been talking about, an increase in rent assistance, repair, picking up on your comments about landlords, Juanita. Somebody previously, it's gone off the screen, but said, wouldn't it be effective to have Juanita sit down and tell her story to a range of politicians? So that came up before. Picking up perhaps on what you just said, Peter, in Parliament, what about the representation there of people with lived experience and different experiences that people within Parliament have had, which comes back to some of the comments that we've had as well. So we've got a range of different reflections on the discussion, and I guess for the day we really wanted to ground the discussion of the day, going on the arc that we've been on, with the lived experience of why this discussion is fundamentally important, why it's really important to think about the tax and transfer system, and while we think about the reform and the change that needs to be implemented. And I think we've heard from the panel, and we've heard throughout the day, the need for it to be whole-scale change, for the connected pieces to come together. And that's been reflected in the discussion that we had in the last comment we just had today as well, about you need to have one entry point into a system that can actually speak to itself, rather than require the people to have to navigate the complexity of a system that doesn't make any sense. So I think that's a really strong reflection for us all to take with us for the day, and really want to thank the panellists and in fact all of you for being here and for participating in the discussion, and for everybody who shared their reflections online as well. So thank you.
You guys can get off the stage. That was fantastic. Give it up for... Oh. So everyone's been very good. Most of you have stayed. Who's going to come back tomorrow? Hey, that's good. So it's not goodbye, it's just au revoir. Who's going to come across to the John Curtin for a drink? Very good. Before we go, you've all been really quiet. We've almost purposely not had roving mics, A, because of our friends watching online, but also because there were so many good things coming out of the panel. We didn't want speeches. But now, if anyone wants to say anything, you're going to actually have to earn it, though. So I'm interested if anyone wants to pull out their attention tool. Any ideas that inspired you today? And we might call a few people that come up with the best ones, and I'll come down and ask you a bit. What was your most inspiring? I don't think I should jump onto that. I think I should go around. What was your most inspiring thing that's come out of today, Emma?
It's like asking me to name my favourite child. I can do that because I only have one. But Her name's Iris. But look, I think genuinely, what's been inspiring for me today is the willingness of so many people to show up and have this conversation, of all of the speakers. And people keep saying to me, how did you pull this together so quickly? And the answer is just about everyone I asked said yes within 5 minutes. And I'm so grateful for that. And I think what's particularly inspiring is there's a real mix of views and a mix of people here. We all obviously care passionately about the issue, but it's been a conversation that hasn't just been about one particular, interest or one particular person's ambition to change this tax or that tax. There's been a real willingness to engage with a complex system, to learn things that you don't understand. And I mean, Ellie, for someone who said you didn't know what the tax and transfer system meant when I asked you about it, wow. And just a willingness to acknowledge that we are responsible for this conversation. We can't just leave it up to politicians. We have to drive this conversation ourselves. So it's been great.
Everyone must have sore thumbs, but I would also endorse whoever put that up, because the C word was mentioned and I thought it was really interesting in the context of generational. Emma dropped the C-bomb class, and it's the framer that no one really talks about in these discussions. What inspired you, Chris?
Well, I said the last panel killed it, because I really think it did, along with Ellie's contribution earlier, the whole thing about stories. I mean, we need all the stories we can get. Add that to all the brilliance and wisdom of the earlier parts of the panel, and we've got a winner, I think.
Who else has got something they want to share that was inspiring them? What about you, Margaret?
I like the way that taxation was connected with government expenditure and the provision of public services. They're quite often talked about in separate silos, and I felt the sessions today really brought them together.
Yeah, it was inspiring program design, and also Ken setting up the straw man that tax was boring, and then we've proven otherwise. That's interesting. Learnt the transfer system is as broken as the tax system. Who said that? Must be somebody
Someone
online.
Well
Thank you.
Back there.
Sorry?
Out in the hall.
Oh, out in the hall. We won't do the full BB King going out into the street, still playing the guitar. That's an old person's reference, sorry. Anyone else got anything they want to share that inspired them? Or is the thought of getting to the pub what's inspiring you at the moment?
May. I'll get to May.
You need the mic. There you go.
The thing that I found really inspiring was the importance of vivid lived experience stories as a base for campaigning, but I do think it needs to be backed up by data, which Juanita gave us a brilliant example of in telling us about the rent she paid and giving us that just really succinct story about the equity that she forewent in a house she could have owned. So I think it's the two things. I don't think it's either or.
Yeah, thank you very much for everyone coming here today. What I heard today was called hope, hearing other people's experience. And furthermore, what the Far South Coast Community United Unions is doing. We've got 6 out of 6 agenda items that have been reviewed and adopted and endorsed. And we're about to go to the implementation board. It covers NDIS, it covers housing, it covers tax, and I'm absolutely proud to be here today, ladies and gentlemen, and you're inspiring me, and I've got you all. And thank you to Team Prosper and Get Up and Per Capita and all and sundry here today, and good to see Jojo over there. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Tom, or as he might call you, Token, the young person.
There are other young people
There's
here,
so
Peter.
many young people here. I'm not young. I've aged out of being young.
May's young too, though.
I like to joke that I'm not a recovering economist. I did economics at university, and I feel like every day I'm unlearning it. And today has been another day of unlearning being an economist, I think.
Anyone else? Cass, you're always inspired.
Of course, I can't think of anywhere I'd rather be than in a room with a mob talking about tax reform, I can tell you, because it is so powerful what it can do if we manage to do it. So one of the things for me is I know, and Emma, you talked about this, you know, the thing of, oh, I don't know much about tax, right? And that thing of, oh, so therefore, you know, oh, could I really come on and talk about it? And we've just demonstrated how powerfully it is to have people who live the reality of the consequences of a failed tax system leading the discussion. And so for me, it's an invitation again to, you know, often it's very male dominated, often it's very white male dominated, often it's very, you know, oh, I'm an economist or I'm not an economist. I want us to kind of really strip that back and say this is a community owned system, and we should be prepared to lead it, and with people to be not needing to say, I don't know much about it, in order to take hold of the power of the discussion. And that's, so for me, it's a call out to all of our sector and everybody to put tax at the front of the priorities, because it's very, very powerful. So that's what I feel really excited.
Thanks, Cassandra.
Yeah.
Corey?
I just wanted to call out Miranda's effective marginal tax rate, the way that we holistically look at tax reform, including the cost of childcare if we send a woman back to work. We have the same issue in ageing for age pension, the cost of the taper rates, for example. I think that's something we don't talk about enough, and it was great to see it on the slide today.
Hey, Peter Davidson from MACOS. I think Juanita just convinced me that we've got this whole landlord-tenant thing wrong. Yeah. They should be paying you.
Got a couple more.
Okay. For me, it was when Sharon brought the voices of children into a debate on tax and transfer. And I think that particularly lodged in my brain because for quite a while, I mean, Sharon told you about her research and how they went around, they actually talked with children. Well, the other person in Australia who has done that is Anne Hollands, the National Children's Commissioner. And out of those conversations, she has really powerfully and strongly advocated to government that we should have a child filter over every policy, every reform that we do. Now, as you can imagine, they are paying absolutely no attention. But if they did, and if you think about it, you think about everything that Ken Henry was saying earlier about intergenerational wealth, et cetera, if we actually could fix our tax and transfer system so that every kid in Australia was okay, then we fix it for all the rest of us.
Can I just really cheekily say I'm going to make an assumption that might have been a boomer talking out for a younger generation, and why doesn't the media report about that?
I've got two cameos. I first learnt about economics at University High School in 1965 when Mr. Fletcher, in his flowing academic gown, leapt into our classroom on the first day of that academic year and said, "Economics, kids! It's about guns or butter and houses." And I thought this afternoon or this morning when AUKUS was mentioned, clearly it's guns and not butter and housing. The second point case study is that in 1974, I was chair of Youth 2004. I had a job like you for 10 years. I was, Tom, the token youth of Victoria for quite a number of years, working on 25, 50, 75, 100-year horizons. And as I listened this morning to Ken, an amazing presentation from the heart and from the environment, because really he anchored the whole economic dialogue to what are we doing with nature as ourselves as part of nature, and not again about guns. But as I listened to that talk this morning by the panellists, I heard the eminent Australians of 1974 say the same things. And here we've gone, for me, over 50 years, and it's the same dialogue, and it's time for what my grandparents and great-grandparents said to me as a young teenager If the people don't take charge of themselves and community, the politicians will be the agents of change to take the money away. Thank you.
And Ismo?
Thanks, Emma. I was struck by the observation that we've approached tax reform in Australia like a plate of hors d'oeuvres, you know, taking a little sliver of whatever is kind of on the plate. And then reflecting on the three keynotes that really painted a big picture about tax reform. It's a big story. Reform across space and place, reform through time, reform across people. And we've just lost sight of that by pursuing these isolated micro changes without context. So I think there's an opportunity to make tax reform sexy and to tell a big story. So that's, I think, what I've taken away today.
Hi, yeah, I just want to say that I'm definitely inspired by the visions of equity that everyone shared, and I've learnt a lot today, but also want to throw out a provocation that I think migration has been really excluded from the conversation so far, and I would love to hear more from any of you about what that means. I think intergenerational equity is really important and has been really central to a lot of the conversations today, but we're also talking about a tax system in which migrants bear both a lot of the labour in Australia and increasingly pay income tax, bear the tax burden, and are part of the care economy in such a crucial way, a part of all of the things that we're talking about, housing, health, education, and yet are largely and increasingly excluded from all of the public services, from democratic representation, and from the transfer system. So yeah, would love to hear more about that. Thanks.
Got it. The inspiring idea for me was from Ellie, and that's the idea of a campaign, a unified campaign that we all pitch in and contribute to. Debates, analysis are wonderful and must lead to a campaign. Thanks.
Emily?
Emily from Prosper Australia. And everyone said everything that was substantive and important. Thank you. So I thought I'd throw in something cheeky, which is that I loved the lived experience panels because I have been to a lot of discussions on tax and they've mostly been economists and such. But I feel like we have a skewed representation. It's really important that we have people here who are at the pointy end of the tax and transfer system. But can we also have a panel next time with Gina? I want a panel where a lot of, I was a beneficiary of the stage 3 tax cuts. I have a lived experience of having more money in my pocket. I feel like if we don't acknowledge that there are winners and losers, and maybe I think there are people in our community who are winning and who are also brave enough to recognise that winning in self-interest isn't winning for the whole of the community. So bring on the millionaires panel.
Let's think about that for next time, huh?
On that, I think it's really interesting in what causes philanthropy tends to fund, and it would be a really interesting test of some of the philanthropic billionaires whether making the system fair would be part of that. Have we got anyone else, or Janet, you do the run up there, or I will.
You do the run.
Then we might do. And then it might be last drinks, but if anyone else wants one more go.
My big takeaway is that the most toxic person in the entire history of this country is John Howard. Who
How uncharacteristic of you, Janet, not to hold back.
And landmines which have blown up our understanding of ourselves, our welfare system, our tax system, our universities. He destroyed. And the cost of getting them back to be functional is probably impossible. But one of the really bad things he did was to change our national narrative. This place, this building, they opened it and laid the foundation stone in 1858 on a piece of land given by the Victorian Premier, who had been elected in an election with manhood suffrage. The second place in the world, or the first place in the world, to get manhood suffrage. He'd been elected. Women would get the vote later, but that was the big one. The man who was the Premier gave the land to the unions to have a palace for education, meeting and organisation at a time when unions were banned in England and picketing and striking were banned. Now, men wouldn't get manhood suffrage in England until 1918. The other thing about that Premier was that he was an Irish Catholic. Now, quickly tell me, who was the first baptised Catholic to be Prime Minister of the United Kingdom? Don't know? It's Boris Johnson. Which is about
the first
sort
Australian
of having a Henry VIII. Somewhat similar character, really. Now, these were huge things because this was a laboratory of democracy, of unionism, and it soon became a laboratory for state socialism, which was decried and deplored. I even studied a gynecologist who believed that women's gynecological problems were caused by their bad husbands in Australia who went on strike and belonged to union. Well, exactly, right. So,
Anyway,
right.
John Howard changed the narrative.
Yes, now what I'm just about
She'll
to finish.
get to the point.
Because John Howard told us that Australia was made on the shores of Gallipoli. That's when our whole national character was formed by a group of invaders who were invading a sovereign country and who behaved extremely badly when they were on leave in Cairo. They weren't really great blokes at all. They were quite brave, but so was everyone else fighting in the First World War. They weren't unique. But that army was the most unionised army in the world. And what we achieved at that time was mass mobilisation. Now, what we fail to do now is to mobilise our people around exciting ideas about equality, about justice, about collaboration. And so if we're going to do anything today from what we need to do, it's going to have to be political. And it's going to not just be get up, it's not going to be campaigns on the internet, it's not going to be signs in your front yard, it's not going to be badges, it's going to be mobilising people to work politically together in organised politics. And you really need to have a little more faith in the Labor Party and its politicians, because when you talk to them and listen to what they say and read what they write, they know about all of this.
So, and this is why we need to come back tomorrow, because that is going to be the discussion tomorrow. So thanks, Janet. There was one more slide. You can do it later. Well, he did. So we just wanted to know what got people thinking differently. So you can fill that out in your own time. It's useful for us. I think all the panels have been terrific today, so there's no winners and losers. And again, thank you for everyone that participated in those. The only other thing we were going to ask from you before your thumbs give it in is just if there's, and don't need to do it now, if there's anything else you'd like us to know about how today's gone, anything we could be doing better, you know, any advice from the cheap seats, really appreciate it.
Other than the billionaires panel, what have we missed?
Oh, the billionaires panel is brilliant. In fact, billionaires for tax reform would be outstanding, although I think it would get lost in the translation and it might be calling for a flat tax of corporate rates. It's a lot lower.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, what have I done? Well, that might mean that it is time for us to
Almost.
Put a pin in it.
Almost. I do want to thank you all for coming today and for staying with us. I want to thank in particular the Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation, the Reichstein Foundation, Manifera, Triple and New Democracy for their funding of this event. And without them, we wouldn't have this technology to bring people in from around the country. So thank you. Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, Rachel. Thanks, Harriet. Thanks, Ian. And I think Sally's here. Thank you, Sally. Tomorrow, you will hear first up from the wonderful Catherine Trebek, who's going to talk about how we can think a bit differently about the economy and how we can put our well-being at the centre of it. We'll then have a fantastic panel discussion. Warwick Smith's on that panel, I think, as well as Louise Crawford. Amanda Cahill's zooming in from up in Queensland with The Next Economy to talk about climate change and the transition and local communities. And then Mark Zernzak will lead a conversation on international tax issues, and we'll have one more lived experience panel to wrap up the event. Greatly looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. Thanks so much for your participation today. Get a wristband from Meredith, or up the back from Sarah, or from Meredith, Rebecca, Sarah, that will entitle you to a drink on us across the road at the Curtain. See you there.
Thanks, guys.